A millionaire picks up the phone in his office with the firm intention of firing his cleaning lady after her third consecutive absence, without justification. He dials the number preparing for a dry speech about professional responsibility. But instead of the adult voice he expected, a little 6-year-old voice answers from the other end of the line, whispering desperately, "Daddy? Hello, is that you? Mommy won't wake up." When he asks, confused, what's happening, the child's answer makes his blood run cold. "She's not breathing right. I don't know what to do." What he discovers when he arrives at the employee's house leaves him in complete shock. Edward Miller adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt as he surveyed the city through the plate glass of his 30th floor office. The scent of imported leather armchairs mingled with the artificial aroma of the air conditioning, creating that frosty atmosphere he so appreciated. At 52, he had built an empire on 3 unbreakable pillars: discipline, efficiency, and zero tolerance for incompetence. His fingers drummed impatiently on the mahogany desk as he reviewed his agenda. 3 postponed meetings, 2 pending contracts, and a decision he had been putting off for days. The human resources report lay open before him, highlighting in red the name that irritated him deeply: Maria Rodriguez, cleaner, 3rd consecutive unjustified absence. "Unacceptable," he murmured, pulling the landline phone with a sharp movement. Edward did not tolerate irresponsibility, especially from employees in basic positions. If Maria couldn't fulfill her simple obligations, she certainly didn't deserve to remain in his company. The dismissal would be swift, surgical, leaving no room for pleas or flimsy excuses. He dialed the number noted on her employee file, mentally preparing the cold speech he would use. Words about professional commitment, responsibility, natural consequences of inadequate choices. His secretary had gone to lunch, leaving him alone in that controlled environment where every element reflected his power and determination. The phone rang once, twice. On the 3rd try, someone answered, "Daddy, hello, is that you?" Edward frowned, confused. The voice was high-pitched, childish, laden with an urgency that caught him off guard. He must have dialed the wrong number. He checked the digits again, but they were correct. "No, child, I need to speak to Maria Rodriguez," he said, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the unusual situation. "Uncle," the tiny voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Mommy won't wake up. I tried to shake her, but she won't open her eyes." Edward's stomach clenched. Something in the fragility of that small voice pierced his corporate armor like a sharp blade. He instinctively stood up, still holding the phone. "What do you mean, she won't wake up? Where are you?" "At home, Uncle." Mommy was on the couch watching TV, and suddenly she just got quiet. "She's not breathing right. She's making a funny noise." The child began to cry softly. "Daddy left a long time ago." Edward felt his blood run cold. His business instincts were overrun by something more primitive, more human. The irritation over the employee's absence instantly transformed into genuine concern for a child clearly in danger. "Listen carefully," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "What's your name?" "Sophia, I'm 6. "Sophia, you were very brave to answer the phone. Now I need you to tell me, is your mother breathing?" "I think so, but very slowly. And she peed her pants." Edward was already grabbing his car keys, his impeccable suit forgotten. "Sophia, do you know your address?" The girl recited the address in a trembling voice. Edward quickly jotted it down, recognizing the working-class neighborhood where some of his employees lived. The distance there would be at least 40 minutes in the afternoon traffic. "Listen closely, Sophia. I'm going to call for an ambulance, and then I'm coming to you. Can you open the door when I get there?" "I can, Uncle. But will you really come? Mommy always says her boss is a very important person." Edward paused in the middle of the hallway, struck by the innocence of that question. For a moment, he saw himself through the eyes of a frightened child, someone powerful enough to help, but too distant to genuinely care. Yes, Sophia, hang in there. Edward drove like he had never driven in his meticulously planned life. The black Mercedes cut through traffic with urgency as he alternated between calling 911 and trying to calm Sophia on speakerphone. The girl's voice had become his guide through entirely unfamiliar territory, genuine fear for another person. "Uncle, Mommy made that noise again," Sophia said, clearly trying to be brave despite the terror in her voice. "It's okay, Sophia. The ambulance is already on its way. You're being very strong." Edward was surprised by the kindness that naturally flowed from his voice, something his employees had never heard. When he finally arrived at the address, Edward parked in front of a structure that profoundly shocked him. Maria Rodriguez's home was a small, worn-down house of wood and concrete blocks, with peeling paint and a tiny garden where desperate attempts at flowers struggled to survive. The disparity between his mansion and that reality hit him like a punch to the gut. Sophia opened the door before he even knocked. She was a tiny girl with curly hair tied back with a worn-out elastic, wearing an oversized t-shirt and torn flip-flops. Her brown eyes, huge with fear, lit up slightly when she saw him. "Uncle really came," she whispered, as if it were a miracle. Edward knelt down to be at her height, a gesture he had never made with any child. "Of course I came. Where's your mother?" Sophia led him to a tiny living room, where Maria Rodriguez lay unconscious on the sofa. Edward vaguely recognized the woman he occasionally saw in the company hallways, always discreet, always working silently. Now, seeing her unconscious and clearly ill, he felt an inexplicable shame for never having truly paid attention to her as a human being. The environment revealed a dignified but devastating poverty. Few pieces of furniture, all old but clean. In the small refrigerator, Edward could see through the open door that there were only a few basic items. A pot on the stove contained leftover rice, probably the meal Sophia had tried to prepare herself. "How long has your mother been like this?" he asked, discreetly checking Maria's pulse. "Since lunchtime. She said she had a headache and went to lie down for a bit." Sophia wiped her nose on her t-shirt sleeve. Then she started making funny noises and didn't wake up. The sound of the ambulance siren echoed on the narrow street. Edward felt immense relief, but also a growing anxiety. What now? What would happen to Sophia while Maria received medical attention? The question surprised him with its spontaneity. When had he started genuinely worrying about the well-being of people not part of his immediate circle? The paramedics arrived quickly, professional and efficient. After an initial assessment, they confirmed that Maria needed to be hospitalized immediately. Unstable vital signs, dangerously low blood pressure, signs of severe dehydration. "Sir, are you related to the patient?" one of the paramedics asked. I'm her employer," Edward replied, the words sounding strange on his lips. "And the child." Edward looked at Sophia, who clung to his leg with the desperate trust of someone who had no one else. The question hung in the air like a bombshell about to drop on his carefully structured life. "Uncle, will you stay with me?" Sophia looked up, and Edward saw in her eyes a vulnerability that shattered something inside his chest. The ambulance waited. Maria needed urgent medical care, Sophia needed protection, and Edward Miller, the man who planned every minute of his existence, found himself facing the most impulsive decision of his life. "I will," he said, surprising himself. "I'll stay with you." At the hospital, Edward found himself in completely unfamiliar territory. Holding Sophia's small, trembling hand while awaiting news about Maria was an experience that challenged decades of emotional detachment. The girl remained glued to him as if he were her only anchor in the storm. "Doctor, what's the situation?" Edward asked when a doctor finally approached the waiting room. Dr. Stevenson, a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes, consulted his clipboard before replying, "Mrs. Rodriguez is stable, but the situation is concerning. Severe dehydration, profound anemia, and signs of malnutrition." From what we've gathered, she's been hiding symptoms for weeks. Sophia squeezed Edward's hand tighter. Is Mommy going to be okay? We'll take good care of her, the doctor replied with a reassuring smile. But she'll need to stay hospitalized for a few days to regain her strength. Edward felt the weight of responsibility fall upon his shoulders. And the child? Does she have other relatives? According to records, there are no emergency contacts other than her mother's work. The doctor looked meaningfully at Edward. You mentioned being her employer. Yes. Edward hesitated, realizing that simple word carried implications he hadn't considered. Maria has worked for my company for 2 years. During the conversation, Sophia fell asleep in Edward's lap, exhausted by the day's stress. The child's weight in his arms awakened something deeply buried in his memory, the distant recollection of carrying his own son like this, before the bitter divorce and legal battles turned paternal love into a wound he preferred to forget. Mr. Miller, the doctor said softly so as not to wake Sophia. Mrs. Rodriguez was clearly battling illness alone. From her condition, I suspect she's been depriving herself of adequate food to ensure her daughter had what she needed. Edward felt a knot in his stomach. How many times had he seen Maria in the company hallways, always discreet, always efficient, without ever suspecting the silent drama she faced at home? Guilt began to gnaw at his conscience like acid. Can she have visitors? For now, no. She's sedated and needs complete rest. Maybe tomorrow. Edward looked at Sophia, who slept peacefully despite the day's trauma, the absolute trust she had placed in him. A stranger she knew only as Mommy's boss was simultaneously touching and terrifying. What kind of man had he become for a desperate child to see him as salvation? Back in the car, with a sleepy Sophia in the back seat, Edward faced a decision that would change everything. Taking the girl to his mansion meant crossing a line he had never imagined crossing. His house was his sanctuary, a meticulously organized space where nothing happened without his absolute control. "Uncle," Sophia murmured, half asleep, "do you have food at your house? I'm hungry, but I don't want to bother you." Edward looked in the rearview mirror and saw a child trying to be polite, even in her extreme vulnerability. The upbringing Maria had managed to give her daughter, despite all the difficulties, touched something deep in his hardened heart. "Yes, I do, Sophia. And you're not bothering me." As he drove through the illuminated streets toward the upscale neighborhood where he lived, Edward realized he was carrying more than just a frightened child. He was bringing home a mirror that would reflect all the choices he had made over the years, all the missed opportunities to be truly human. The mansion rose imposingly at the end of the tree-lined street. Sophia fully woke up upon seeing the majestic structure, her eyes widening in admiration and intimidation. Edward parked in the garage, realizing for the first time how dauntingly large his house might seem to a small child. Sophia's entrance into Edward's mansion was like watching two realities collide in slow motion. The girl stood still in the marble foyer, her small eyes surveying the imposing columns, the crystal chandelier, and the curved staircase that seemed straight out of a movie. Her torn flip-flops contrasted brutally with the polished floor that reflected every movement. "Wow," she whispered, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Is this where you live, Uncle?" Edward observed his own house through Sophia's eyes and, for the first time, realized how cold and intimidating that environment truly was. Every expensive object, every architectural detail designed to impress, suddenly seemed excessive and soulless. "Yes, it is," he replied, feeling strangely embarrassed by the ostentation. "Are you hungry?" Before Sophia could answer, Carmen, the housekeeper, appeared in the hall. The 60-year-old woman, who had worked for Edward for a decade, stopped abruptly upon seeing the child. Her cordial expression instantly morphed into thinly veiled disapproval. "Mr. Miller," she said in a controlled tone, "I wasn't aware we were expecting visitors." "Carmen, this is Sophia." She'll be staying with us for a few days, while her mother recovers at the hospital. Edward realized he couldn't adequately explain the situation without sounding like he was justifying himself. Carmen scrutinized Sophia from head to toe, clearly noticing her simple clothes and disheveled hair. "I see. And where will she stay?" The question carried a subtext Edward immediately caught. Carmen was questioning not just the logistics, but the very decision to bring an employee's daughter into his home. The woman who had always been efficient and discreet now radiated palpable resistance. "In the guest room on the second floor," Edward replied firmly, establishing that he wasn't asking permission. Sophia, sensing the tension in the air, approached Edward and whispered, "Uncle, if I'm bothering you, I can sleep on the couch. I'm used to it." The innocence of the offer hit Edward like a punch to the gut. Carmen, in turn, seemed even more uncomfortable, as if the child's humility only confirmed her prejudices about people like that. "You are not sleeping on the couch," Edward said, protectively running his hand through Sophia's hair. "Let's get you a snack." In the kitchen, the situation repeated itself with Frances, the cook. The woman, normally cheerful and talkative, became strangely formal in Sophia's presence. She prepared a simple sandwich, but her body language screamed disapproval. "Sir, does the girl have any food allergies I should know about?" Frances asked, as if Sophia weren't present. "You can ask her directly," Edward replied, annoyed by the condescending tone. "Sophia, are you allergic to any food?" "I don't know what an allergy is," Sophia replied honestly, biting into the sandwich with obvious appetite. "Mommy always said food shouldn't be wasted, so I eat everything." The silence that followed was laden with discomfort. Frances and Carmen exchanged meaningful glances, clearly interpreting the answer as confirmation of their suspicions about the child's inappropriate background. Edward felt growing indignation at his staff's attitude, but also recognized that he himself had never shown genuine interest in his employees' personal lives. The coldness he had always cultivated was now turning against him through others. After the snack, while Carmen reluctantly prepared the guest room, Edward took Sophia to see the house. The girl marveled at each room, delicately touching objects as if they were sacred relics. "Uncle, do you live alone in this huge house?" "I do," Edward replied, noticing for the first time the echo of loneliness in his own voice. "That must be sad," Sophia said, with the brutal honesty of children. "Our house is tiny, but Mommy and I talk a lot." "Who do you talk to here?" The innocent question hit Edward hard, forcing him to confront a truth he had spent years avoiding. His luxurious mansion was merely a gilded cage where he had isolated himself from any genuine human connection. The first night with Sophia in the mansion proved to be a challenge Edward could never have prepared for. At 2 a.m, he was awakened by soft crying coming from the guest room. He found the girl huddled in the king-size bed, which seemed to swallow her whole, trembling with fear in the dark. "Sophia, what happened?" "I had a bad dream," she sobbed. "I dreamed Mommy wasn't coming back, and Daddy was coming to pick me up to leave." Edward sat on the edge of the bed, completely lost on how to comfort a frightened child. His paternal experience was buried under years of resentment and pain, rusted from disuse. "Your mother will be fine, Sophia. The doctors will take good care of her. But what if she dies like Grandma? What if I'm all alone?" Tears streamed freely down her small face. "I don't want to go with Daddy. He yells a lot and he reeks." Edward felt something clench in his chest. The mention of Sophia's father sparked an unsettling curiosity, mixed with an instinctive protectiveness that surprised him. "Have you not seen your father in a long time?" "He left when I was 4. Mommy said he got sick and needed to take care of himself away from us." Sophia wiped her nose on the sleeve of Carmen's borrowed pajamas, obviously too big for her. "But sometimes he shows up and asks Mommy for money. When she doesn't give it to him, he gets mad." Edward clenched his fists involuntarily. The image of a man intimidating Maria and Sophia sparked a fury he hadn't felt in years. How could a father abandon such a sweet child and then still have the audacity to torment the family he left behind? Do you want me to stay here until you fall asleep? Sophia nodded vigorously, and Edward found himself sitting on the floor beside the bed, something he had never imagined doing. As the girl's breathing finally became regular, he reflected on her words. A father who yelled a lot and reeked, clearly alcoholic and violent. The next morning, during breakfast, Edward watched Sophia eat with a ravenous appetite, as if each meal might be her last. Carmen served the dishes with a cold efficiency that began to deeply irritate him. "Carmen, could you treat Sophia with more warmth?" "Of course, Mr. Miller," the housekeeper replied, in a tone that made it clear she disagreed with the entire situation. After Carmen left the room, Sophia sighed softly. "Uncle, why doesn't she like me?" Edward realized he couldn't lie to those innocent eyes. Some people need time to get used to changes. "Mommy always said that when people don't like you for no reason, it's because their heart hurts." Sophia bit into a piece of toast. "Do you think her heart hurts?" The child's simple wisdom left Edward speechless. Maria had taught her daughter to respond to hostility with compassion, a lesson he himself had never learned. The phone rang. Interrupting the moment, it was the hospital with news about Maria. Edward answered in Sophia's presence, who held his free hand with anxiety. "Mr. Miller, this is Dr. Stevenson. Ms. Rodriguez is conscious and asking to see her daughter. But there's something else we need to discuss in person. Something serious. I'd prefer not to discuss it over the phone. Can you come in today?" Edward looked at Sophia, whose eyes were fixed on him, trying to decipher the conversation from his end of the line. "I can, and can Sophia see her mother?" "For a few minutes, yes." When Edward hung up, Sophia was radiant. "I'm going to see Mommy today." "Yes, you are." Edward smiled, but a growing concern took hold of him. What else had the doctor discovered about Maria's condition? And why did he need to discuss something in person that he couldn't discuss over the phone? The drive to the hospital was filled with Sophia's animated chatter as she mentally prepared everything she would tell her mother. Edward, however, felt a growing knot in his stomach, sensing that his life was about to become even more complicated. At the hospital, Edward observed the reunion between mother and daughter with a mixture of relief and admiration. Maria Rodriguez, despite her paleness and obvious fragility, completely lit up when she saw Sophia running towards her. The embrace between the two was so charged with genuine love that Edward felt almost intrusive witnessing such intimacy. "Mommy, are you okay? I was so scared," Sophia chattered, clinging to her mother's neck. "I'm better, my princess. And you? Where did you sleep last night?" Maria looked over her daughter's head at Edward, her eyes reflecting deep gratitude mixed with embarrassment. "I slept at Uncle Edward's house. Mommy, it's so big. It has a movie staircase and a huge bed." Sophia gestured animatedly. "He stayed with me when I had a nightmare and gave me yummy food." Maria closed her eyes for a moment, clearly emotional. "Mr. Miller, I don't know how to thank you. I never imagined you would." "No need to thank me," Edward interrupted, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "Sophia is a wonderful girl. You must be very proud." After a few minutes of conversation, a nurse came to take Sophia to show her the hospital playground, leaving Edward alone with Maria. The woman immediately tried to apologize, but Edward interrupted her. "Maria, you need to focus on getting better. About your absences. I understand now." Tears streamed down the employee's face. "Sir, I was desperate. I couldn't lose my job, but I also couldn't leave home. I was so weak. And Sophia is still so small. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you ask for help?" Maria lowered her eyes, ashamed. "You always seemed so distant. You never showed any interest in your employees' lives. I thought if you knew about my problems, you'd fire me on the spot." Maria's brutal honesty hit Edward like a slap. She was right. He had deliberately cultivated that image of corporate coldness. maintaining distance from any personal involvement. Dr. Stevenson arrived, interrupting the tense conversation. "Mr. Miller, may we speak privately?" In the doctor's office, the bombshell finally exploded. Ms. Rodriguez's situation is more complex than we initially imagined. In addition to malnutrition and anemia, we discovered she has a chronic condition that requires prolonged and expensive treatment. What kind of condition? Early-stage kidney problems, likely the result of years of stress, poor nutrition, and lack of preventive medical care. With proper treatment, she can lead a normal life, but without it, the doctor left the sentence hanging. Edward felt his stomach churn. How much does the treatment cost? Outside the public system, about $3,000 a month, plus regular tests and special medications. For Edward, $3,000 was less than he spent monthly on imported wines. For Maria, it represented more than her entire salary. "And there's more," the doctor continued. "During the anamnesis, we discovered that Ms. Rodriguez has been hiding these symptoms for months out of fear of losing her job. She even fainted several times at home, always when her daughter wasn't present." Edward clenched his fists. She could have died. Yes. If her daughter hadn't called yesterday, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation today. When they returned to the room, Sophia was telling her mother about the mansion's staff, imitating Carmen with a precision that made Maria smile despite her weakness. "Mommy, why is Mrs. Carmen mad at me? I didn't do anything wrong." Maria quickly looked at Edward, sensing the tension. "Sometimes people need time to get to know us better, Princess." Edward observed the interaction and made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't just pay for Maria's treatment. He would completely restructure how he treated his employees. The calculated coldness that had been his hallmark was costing real lives. "Maria," he said, "I want you to focus only on getting better. Your job is guaranteed with a salary increase and full health insurance. And Sophia can stay with me for as long as needed." The shock on Maria's face was palpable. "Sir, I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's justice." In the second week of living with Sophia, Edward began to believe he had found a balance. The girl had adapted to the mansion's routine, winning over even Frances with her natural politeness and genuine gratitude for every gesture of kindness. Carmen remained resistant, but tolerated the child's presence with cold professionalism. Edward had transformed one of the offices into a cozier temporary room for Sophia, with toys he had impulsively bought during a trip to the mall. Seeing the girl play in the room where he used to only conduct business meetings brought a lightness to the mansion that he hadn't known was missing. That Thursday, as Sophia drew at the kitchen table and Edward reviewed contracts on his laptop, the doorbell rang insistently. Carmen went to answer, but returned minutes later with a worried expression. "Mr. Miller, there's a man at the door asking to speak about Maria's daughter. He says he's the girl's father." Edward felt his blood run cold. Sophia stopped drawing immediately, her eyes widening in fear. Clearly, she had recognized the voice echoing from the entrance hall. "It's Daddy," she whispered, hiding behind Edward. "Did he come to pick me up?" Edward placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "Stay here with Francis. I'll see what he wants." At the entrance, Edward found a disheveled-looking man with crumpled clothes and the unmistakable scent of alcohol. Robert Rodriguez, the surname he had taken when he married Maria, was about 40, but looked much older due to obvious excesses. His bloodshot eyes surveyed the mansion with thinly veiled covetousness. "So you're the rich guy playing dad to my daughter," Robert said, slurring his words slightly. "I'm Edward Miller, and you must be Robert." Edward kept his tone controlled, but his posture was clearly defensive. "I came to pick up Sophia. I heard Maria's hospitalized, and my daughter is living here." Robert took a step forward, invading Edward's personal space. "This isn't right, man. A kid needs to be with family." "Family." Edward couldn't hide the disdain in his voice. "You abandoned Maria and Sophia 2 years ago. What kind of family is that? Robert laughed bitterly. The typical rich guy, right? Thinks money solves everything. But I'm the girl's biological father and I have rights. Rights you abdicated when you disappeared from her life. Listen here, you arrogant idiot. Robert advanced aggressively. I might have made mistakes in the past, but I've changed. I stopped drinking, got a job, and I want my daughter back. Edward easily detected the lies. The alcoholic breath, the trembling hands, the evasive eyes. Everything indicated that Robert was far from having changed anything. Sophia is well cared for here. Maria is recovering, and when she leaves the hospital, Maria can be sick all she wants. Robert interrupted cruelly. But Sophia's coming with me today. That's not going to happen. Robert smiled menacingly. You think you can stop me? I'm her father, man. I can call the police, Child Protective Services, social services. They'll side with me. Edward felt a controlled fury take over him. And what do you really want, Robert? Because I'm sure it's not Sophia's well-being. Robert's smile widened, revealing yellow teeth. Smart, the rich guy. Look, I won't lie. Taking care of a kid is work and costs money. But if someone wanted to help with a monthly amount to ensure she stays in a stable environment, I might consider leaving things as they are. Blackmail. Edward immediately recognized the thinly veiled extortion. Robert didn't want Sophia back. He wanted to turn her into a source of income. How much? 5,000 a month would be a good start to show your good faith. Edward clenched his fists, fighting the urge to physically throw Robert off his property, but he knew he had to play intelligently. A man like Robert wouldn't give up easily, and he could indeed use the legal system against him. "Oh, I need to think about it." "You have until tomorrow," Robert said, already walking toward the gate. "Otherwise, I'll be back with CPS and take my daughter, and then you won't be able to do anything." When Robert disappeared down the street, Edward remained standing in the entrance hall, processing the real threat hanging over Sophia. For the girl's sake, he would need to find a way to legally protect her from a father who saw her only as merchandise. The next morning, Edward woke with a steely determination he hadn't felt in years. After a sleepless night, researching custody rights and child protection, he had formulated a strategy. First, he would consult his lawyers. Second, he would talk to Maria about the situation. Third, he would document everything he could about Robert's inappropriate behavior. Sophia immediately sensed his tension during breakfast. The girl, who had become surprisingly perceptive to the moods of the adults around her, played quietly while Edward spoke on the phone with his law firm. "Mr. Green, I need you here today. It's urgent and involves child custody matters." When he hung up, Sophia approached hesitantly. "Uncle, is Daddy going to take me away?" Edward knelt down to be at her height, choosing his words carefully. "I won't let anything bad happen to you, Sophia, I promise. But he's my real dad." Mommy always said fathers have special rights. The innocence of the observation broke Edward's heart. How to explain to a 6-year-old child that some fathers don't deserve the rights biology grants them? Mr. Arthur Green arrived 2 hours later, a 60-year-old man with vast experience in family law. His expression turned grim as Edward recounted the events of the past few days. "Edward, the situation is complicated. Legally, the biological father has preferential rights, especially if he can prove he's trying to rehabilitate himself. But he's clearly trying to extort money. That needs to be proven. And even if we prove it, he can still claim custody, asserting that he's changed and wants to rebuild his relationship with his daughter." Edward felt frustration growing. What about the child's wishes? Sophia's afraid of him. The child's wishes are considered, but she's only 6. The court generally prioritizes family reunification, even in questionable cases. At that moment, Carmen entered the room with an uncharacteristically agitated expression. "Mr. Miller, there's a woman at the door. She says she's a social worker and needs to speak about Sophia. Edward and Mr. Green exchanged worried glances. Robert had carried out his threat faster than expected. The social worker, Ms. Helen Murray, was a middle-aged woman with a severe demeanor and a clipboard always in hand. She surveyed the mansion with critical eyes, clearly suspicious of the irregular situation. "Mr. Miller, I received a report that there's a minor living here without proper legal authorization. The child's father claims she was brought here without his consent. Sophia's mother was hospitalized. The child had nowhere to go. I understand the good intention, but there are protocols. Specialized shelters, registered foster families." Ms. Murray consulted her notes. "The girl's father is requesting immediate custody. The father who abandoned her 2 years ago. People can change, Mr. Miller. He claims to be rehabilitated and employed." Edward realized he was losing the battle. "Can I speak to Sophia before any decision?" The social worker agreed, but her body language indicated she had already made a preliminary decision. When Sophia was called, she hid behind Edward, clearly terrified. "Uncle, I don't want to leave. Please don't let me." Ms. Murray observed the interaction with professional attention. "Sophia, your daddy wants you to live with him. Do you remember him? He used to yell at Mommy," Sophia whispered, "and break things when he drank that stuff that reeks." "That was a long time ago, sweetie. People can change." Edward felt a helpless rage at the institutional blindness. "Miss Murray, with all due respect, Sophia is clearly traumatized by her paternal figure. Forcing her back to him would be cruel. Mr. Miller, I understand your concern, but I cannot base legal decisions on childish fears that may be the result of parental alienation." The implicit accusation that Edward was manipulating Sophia against her father was the last straw. At that moment, he understood that he would need to fight with all available weapons to protect the girl who, without his realizing it, had become the most important thing in his life. After the disturbing visit from the social worker, Edward found himself in uncharted emotional territory. That night, as Sophia slept in the room he had carefully prepared for her, Edward remained awake, contemplating a truth that scared him. He had grown attached to that child in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. The discovery forced him to relive painful memories he had kept buried. His own son, Lucas, who was now 15 and lived with his ex-wife in another state. The bitter divorce had severed paternal ties with surgical precision, transforming Edward from an involved father into an occasional visitor, then into a complete stranger. "How could you distance yourself from your own son, but grow so attached to an employee's daughter?" he questioned quietly, watching Sophia sleep peacefully. The answer came with brutal clarity. Lucas had consciously rejected him, influenced by the manipulations of a resentful mother. Sophia, in contrast, had chosen him naturally, seeing in him genuine protection and affection. The next morning, Edward decided to visit Maria at the hospital with a proposal that had been maturing in his mind. He found her visibly better, but concerned about the news Sophia had shared about her ex-husband's visit. "Mr. Miller, I don't know what to do," Maria confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Robert never wanted to be a father when he was with us. Now he just shows up out of nowhere demanding rights." "Maria, I need to be honest with you about something." Edward chose his words carefully. "In these days, caring for Sophia, I discovered something about myself I didn't know existed. She awakened a paternal instinct in me that I thought I had lost forever." Maria watched him closely, grasping the emotional depth behind his words. "What are you trying to tell me?" "I want to help you permanently, not just financially, but I want to be a constant presence in Sophia's life. I want to protect her, educate her, be present for every important milestone of her growth." "Sir, call me Edward, please. We're family now." Maria closed her eyes, processing the extraordinary offer. "Edward, are you sure?" Raising a child is an enormous responsibility, especially one who isn't biologically yours. I'm more certain of this than of any business decision I've ever made. Edward sat on the edge of the hospital bed. Maria, I want to officially adopt Sophia, with your permission, of course. The shock on Maria's face was complete. Adoption? But that would mean... It would mean she would have full legal protection against Robert. It would mean quality education, health, security, and most importantly, it would mean she would have a father who truly loves her. Maria began to cry, but they were not tears of sadness. Sophia talks about you all the time. She calls you Uncle Edward, with an affection that I've never seen her show for Robert. And I love her as if she were my biological daughter, Edward admitted aloud for the first time. When I think of the possibility of losing her to that man, I feel physical pain in my chest. At that moment, Dr. Stevenson entered the room for his routine examination, but stopped when he noticed the emotional intensity of the conversation. Excuse the interruption. I can come back later. Actually, Doctor, Edward said, perhaps you can help us. In medical terms, what would be your opinion on entrusting Sophia to Robert Rodriguez's care? Dr. Stevenson frowned. Based on what I've observed of the child's behavior and the reports about the family history, I would say it would be highly detrimental to her emotional development. Could you officially document that opinion? Certainly. The child's well-being must always be the priority. Maria took Edward's hand, her decision becoming clear. If you're sure you want this, Edward, I authorize the adoption. Sophia deserves to have a real father, not someone who sees her only as a source of money. Edward felt a wave of relief and gratitude that left him momentarily speechless. For the first time in years, he was building something purely based on love, not profit or convenience. The decision to adopt Sophia triggered a series of events that tested Edward's determination in ways he had never anticipated. The legal process proved to be a bureaucratic labyrinth filled with forms, psychological interviews, home visits, and, even more challenging, Robert Rodriguez's active resistance. At the mansion, reactions were diverse and revealing. Carmen, surprisingly, was the first to express support, confessing privately that she had grown fond of Sophia despite her initial resistance. Mr. Miller, she said while folding the girl's clothes, it took me a while to understand, but now I see that the little one brought life to this house. It's been years since I heard laughter echoing through these halls. Francis, on the other hand, expressed genuine concern about the practical implications. Sir, raising a child will completely change your routine. Are you sure you're prepared to give up the freedom you've always had? The question made Edward reflect deeply. His life had been structured around total autonomy, the ability to make decisions without considering anyone but himself. Now, every choice would involve Sophia's well-being. Francis, he replied, watching the girl play in the garden, I never knew what freedom truly meant until I had someone worth giving it up for. The adoption process, however, faced its first major obstacle when Robert Dieu, advised by a disreputable lawyer, formally contested the petition. His strategy was dirty but legally valid. He claimed Edward was buying a child, using his wealth to separate a family. Mr. Arthur Green arrived at the mansion on a rainy afternoon with disheartening news. Edward, Robert is playing hardball. He obtained a temporary restraining order preventing the adoption process from proceeding until it's proven that he is an unfit parent. And how do we prove that? We need concrete evidence of neglect, abuse, or unsuitability, witnesses, medical records, criminal history. Edward felt frustration growing. The man is clearly an alcoholic and was trying to extort money from me. I know, but we need documented proof, not just our word against his. That night, while helping Sophia with a drawing activity, Edward observed the girl's serious concentration as she carefully colored within the lines. Her discipline and attention to detail were impressive for a 6-year-old. "Uncle Edward," she said without looking up from her drawing, "why does Daddy want me to live with him if he never played with me when I was little?" The innocent question contained a wisdom that cut Edward deeply. Sometimes people do things for reasons that have nothing to do with love, Sophia. But do you do things for love? Edward stopped breathing for a moment. Yes, I do. Everything I do for you is out of love. Sophia finally looked up, her large brown eyes shining with a confidence that simultaneously broke and healed Edward's heart. "Then you're my real dad. Even if you're not the daddy who made me in Mommy's tummy." The simplicity of the child's logic revealed a truth Edward had sought to understand for weeks. Parenthood was not a biological matter, but a daily choice to love, protect, and nurture. At that moment, his phone rang. It was an unknown number, but Edward answered with growing apprehension. "Edward Miller?" "Yes, this is Ms. Patricia Moore from Child Protective Services. I need to inform you that a hearing has been scheduled for next week. Robert Rodriguez is claiming immediate custody of Sophia, alleging that you are keeping the child illegally." Edward clenched his fists, watching Sophia, who continued drawing, oblivious to the legal storm forming around her. The battle for the girl, who had become the center of his world, was just beginning. "I'll be there," he said, his voice laden with a determination that surprised even himself. The days leading up to the hearing became a whirlwind of legal preparation and emotional tension. Edward hired the best lawyers specializing in family law, private investigators to document Robert's history, and even a child psychologist to assess Sophia's emotional state. The girl, sensing the adults and anxiety around her, gradually became quieter and more introspective. Edward found her awake several times during the night, looking out the window as if expecting to see Robert emerge from the shadows. "Uncle Edward," she said one morning while they had breakfast together, "if I have to live with Daddy, will you forget about me?" The question pierced Edward's heart like a blade. "Sophia, that will never happen. I could never forget you." "But what if the judge says so? Mommy always said we have to obey the laws." Edward knelt down to be at her height, holding her small hands. "And listen closely, Princess. No matter what happens, you will always be my daughter in my heart, and I will fight until the last second to keep you safe." Investigations into Robert revealed an even darker history than Edward had imagined. Multiple arrests for public intoxication, 2 jobs lost due to excessive absences, and witnesses who confirmed episodes of domestic violence during his marriage to Maria. However, Robert's lawyer was cunning. He presented falsified documents showing that his client was attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and had obtained a stable job at a construction company. Everything carefully fabricated to impress the court. 3 days before the hearing, Edward received a call that changed everything. "Mr. Miller, this is the 12th precinct. Robert Rodriguez was arrested last night for assault in public and resisting arrest. He was extremely intoxicated and mentioned several times that he was going to get his daughter back from the rich guy." Edward felt a mixture of relief and concern. "Is he still detained?" "He'll be held at least until his arraignment, which isn't until Monday." When Edward shared the news with Mr. Green, the lawyer finally managed a confident smile. "This changes everything, Edward. A father who's arrested for intoxication and makes threatening statements about recovering his daughter doesn't inspire confidence in the judicial system." On the eve of the hearing, Maria was discharged from the hospital. Edward brought her home, his home, where she became emotional seeing how well Sophia had adapted to the environment. The girl's room was filled with drawings, toys, and Polaroid photos Edward had taken during their weeks together. "My God," Maria whispered, looking at a photo of Sophia and Edward making pancakes together, both covered in flour and laughing. "Look how happy she is. Maria, regardless of what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I love Sophia like a daughter, and you will always be welcome here." That night, the three women of Edward's house, Maria, Sophia, and Carmen, prepared a special dinner together. Watching them interact in the kitchen, Edward realized he had inadvertently created an unconventional but genuinely loving family. Sophia insisted on sleeping in Edward's room, claiming she wanted to make sure he would be there when she woke up. Lying in the king-size bed with a 6-year-old curled up beside him, Edward reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple phone call. "Uncle Edward," Sophia murmured sleepily, "that will everything be okay tomorrow?" "Everything will be okay," he replied, kissing her forehead. "No matter what happens, we'll always find a way to stay together." As Sophia fell asleep, Edward remained awake, mentally preparing for the most important battle of his life, not for money, contracts, or power, but for the right to continue being the father to the girl who had transformed his heart of stone into something capable of unconditional love. The family court was filled with palpable tension when Edward arrived, accompanied by Mr. Arthur Green and his legal team. Maria held Sophia's hand tightly. The girl wore a little blue dress Edward had bought especially for the occasion. Sophia was visibly nervous, her large eyes constantly searching for Edward as an anchor of security. Robert appeared in handcuffs, brought directly from the police station. His bloodshot eyes and unshaven face contrasted sharply with the borrowed suit his lawyer had provided. When he saw Sophia, his face contorted into an expression Edward couldn't decipher, whether it was genuine paternal love or mere possessiveness. Judge Marcia Thompson, a 50-year-old woman known for her strictness in cases involving minors, meticulously examined the documents before starting the hearing. "This is a complex case involving the custody of the minor. Sofia Rodriguez, age 6, she declared. On one side, we have the biological father, Robert Rodriguez, asserting his parental rights. On the other, Edward Miller, requesting adoption with the consent of the biological mother, Maria Rodriguez. Robert was called to testify first. His lawyer had prepared him well, but the recent arrest sabotaged any credibility he might have built. "Your Honor," Robert said, attempting to appear sober, "and I acknowledge that I made mistakes in the past, but I am a changed man. I stopped drinking, got a stable job, and I want to make up for lost time with my daughter." "Mr. Rodriguez," the judge interrupted, consulting the records, "you were arrested 3 days ago for public intoxication and assault. How do you reconcile that with your claim of sobriety?" Robert stammered, clearly caught off guard. It was a moment of weakness, Your Honor. The stress of having my daughter raised by a stranger made me relapse. A stranger who, according to reports, has provided education, health, and emotional stability for the child." Edward watched Robert squirm uncomfortably, realizing his strategy was crumbling under judicial scrutiny. When it was his turn to testify, Edward spoke with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "Your Honor, 3 weeks ago, I was a completely different man. Cold, focused only on business, incapable of genuine emotional connections." His voice trembled slightly. "Sophia changed that. She taught me what it means to be a father, not in the biological sense, but in the deepest meaning of the word." "And are you prepared for the responsibilities that entails?" "I am, Your Honor. More prepared than I have ever been for anything in my life." The most touching moment came when Sophia was called to speak with the judge privately. Edward watched anxiously through the glass of the office as the girl answered the questions with touching seriousness. When they returned, the judge's expression had visibly softened. "Sophia told me something very interesting," Judge Thompson declared. "I asked her who she felt safest with, and she replied, 'With Uncle Edward, because he chose me, not because he had to be with me.'" Robert tried to protest, but the judge silenced him with a gesture. "More importantly," she continued, "when I asked her what she wanted most in the world, her answer was, 'For my mommy to get well, and for Uncle Edward to keep being my dad, because he makes me feel special every day.'" Edward felt tears stream down his face, something that hadn't happened in decades. The judge stood up, her decision clearly made. Considering all factors presented, the history of abandonment and instability of the biological father, the child's exemplary adaptation to the petitioner's home, and especially the minor's emotional well-being, I grant the adoption request. The gavel's thud echoed through the courtroom like celestial music. Sophia ran into Edward's arms, and he hugged her as if to shield her from all the world's evils. "Daddy," she whispered for the first time. "Are you really my dad now?" "Always have been, princess. Now it's just official." 3 weeks after the court's decision, life in Edward's mansion had completely transformed. What was once a silent luxury mausoleum had become a vibrant home filled with laughter, conversation, and the contagious energy of a happy child. Sophia ran through the echoing hallways, turning every room into a stage for her imaginative games. Edward implemented profound changes not only in his personal life but also in his company. He created an employee assistance program, offering full health insurance, educational support for their children, and psychological counseling when needed. Maria was promoted to general supervisor with a decent salary and the certainty that she would never again need to hide difficulties for fear of losing her job. "Mr. Miller," Maria said one afternoon as they organized toys scattered across the living room, "sometimes I still can't believe everything that's changed. It feels like a dream." "For me too," Edward replied, watching Sophia build a colorful block castle on the Persian rug that now shared space with educational toys. "But it's a dream I never want to wake from." The adaptation wasn't without its challenges. Edward patiently had to learn about sleep schedules, balanced nutrition, occasional tantrums, and the 1,000 tiny needs of a developing child. Carmen and Francis became his informal teachers, showing him about band-aids for scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the importance of setting limits with love. "Daddy," Sophia said one morning, as they had breakfast together, a ritual Edward had learned to value above any business meeting. "Why were you sad yesterday when I called my doll daughter?" Edward paused, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. The question touched a wound that was still healing, the memory of Lucas, his biological son, from whom he had grown distant after the traumatic divorce. "Because it reminded me of another child I should have loved better," he replied, with an honesty that surprised even himself. "You can call him." The simplicity of Sophia's suggestion revealed a wisdom Edward had lost amidst his adult bitterness. That afternoon, for the first time in 5 years, he dialed his son's number. "Hello, Lucas? It's Dad." The silence on the other end of the line lasted an eternity before Lucas replied, his teenage voice laden with surprise and residual resentment. "Dad, why are you calling?" "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life by drifting away from you, and because I learned that it's never too late to try and fix what we broke." The conversation was difficult, filled with uncomfortable pauses and suppressed emotions, but it ended with Lucas agreeing to visit him during his school break. Edward hung up, heartbroken and hopeful at the same time. Sophia, who had observed the call with the acute intuition of children, approached and held his hand. "He'll like me, Daddy. He'll love you as much as I do," Edward replied, realizing that Sophia was already helping to heal wounds he hadn't even known were still bleeding. That night, as he put Sophia to bed, Edward reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with that desperate phone call weeks ago. A frightened child had saved 2 lives, her own and his. "Daddy," Sophia murmured sleepily, "can we make pancakes again tomorrow? We can make pancakes every day if you want, princess. And you'll be here when I wake up?" "Always," Edward promised, kissing her forehead. "Forever." As Sophia fell asleep, Edward remained sitting beside the bed, watching the child who had completely transformed his understanding of love, family, and the true meaning of wealth. For the first time in decades, Edward Miller was truly at peace with himself. 5 weeks had passed since that phone call that changed everything. The Edward Miller who now prepared breakfast in the sunlit kitchen was unrecognizable compared to the cold man who had once dialed Maria Rodriguez's number with the intention of firing her. "Daddy, you burned the toast again," Sophia giggled, pointing at the dark slices popping out of the toaster. At 6 years old, she had become the house's official food critic, always gentle but honest in her observations. "I'm getting better," Edward defended himself, scraping off the excess char. "Remember the first time I tried to make eggs? They were like rubber. And I ate them anyway because I didn't want you to be sad," Sophia confessed, provoking a genuine laugh from Edward. Maria entered the kitchen wearing her new supervisor's uniform, but her eyes shone with a happiness that transcended any professional achievement. Seeing her daughter interacting with Edward as if they had always been family moved her daily. "Good morning, family," she said, kissing Sophia's forehead and smiling at Edward with a gratitude that needed no words. Carmen appeared minutes later, bringing the morning mail. Among the usual business letters, there was a colorful envelope addressed to Sophia Miller, the first official document with her new full name. "It's my school birthday invitation," Sophia exclaimed, tearing open the envelope with excitement. "Can I go, Daddy?" "Of course you can. We'll pick out a beautiful present for your friend." Watching Sophia read the invitation with difficulty but admirable determination, Edward felt a wave of paternal pride. In recent weeks, he had enrolled the girl in a private school where she was flourishing academically, making friends and discovering talents she had never had the opportunity to explore. "Daddy," Sophia suddenly said, "can I ask you an important question?" "Always." "Do you regret answering the phone that day?" Edward paused, the question carrying an emotional weight that hit him unexpectedly. He looked around the kitchen that had once been merely a functional space and was now filled with Sophia's drawings taped to the fridge. Polaroid photos of special moments stuck to the cabinets, and the organized chaos of a real family living a real life. "Sophia," he said, kneeling down to be at her height, "that call was the most important moment of my entire life. Because that's when I discovered I had a heart capable of loving a wonderful daughter like you. And I discovered I had a daddy who chose me just because he loved me," Sophia replied, hugging him with all the strength of her small arms. At that moment, the phone rang. Edward and Sophia exchanged glances and laughed simultaneously. Now, phone calls were no longer a source of anxiety, but opportunities to spread the happiness they had found. It was Lucas. "I'm calling to confirm his visit that weekend." The teenager's voice carried a hopeful shyness that made Edward's heart race. "Dad, can I meet my little sister? She's eager to meet her big brother," Edward replied, watching Sophia do a little happy dance as she overheard the conversation. After hanging up, Edward carried Sophia in his arms and walked to the patio that overlooked the garden where she played every afternoon. The mansion that had once been a symbol of gilded solitude now echoed with laughter, conversations, and the wonderful sound of a family built not by blood, but by the conscious choice to love. "You know, Princess," Edward said, "sometimes the scariest calls of our lives can lead us to the most beautiful miracles." Sophia smiled, snuggling into his arms. "Like when I answered the phone and you came to save me?" "No, my love. Like when you answered the phone and saved me."